morning all. The reading is Luke 2, 22 to 24, and then 36 to 38. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. There was also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple, but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Amen.
Thanks, Kesua. So, those of you who have followed the wonderful Oasis Church Waterloo 2025 heating saga, the update is good news and bad news. Good news, the timer has been fixed, and now the timer comes on early enough on Sunday morning to warm the auditorium for the service. The bad news, it appears not to have been switched on for the school holidays, hence why it's completely freezing. So if I start jumping up and down or anything to keep warm, then that'll be why. So I'm not going to talk for too long this morning, partly because it is sub-zero temperatures in here, and partly because I think this is the longest I've gone without eating chocolate since Christmas Day. And if I carry on talking for quite a long time, I might kind of go into hypoglycemic shock or something like that. But anyway, I'm not sure that this phrase will mean anything to many of you. Hands up if you know what this phrase means, after the Lord Mayor's show. Is this a thing that you've heard before or not heard before? It's kind of an old English terminology, really. One of those old kind of sayings that, I kind of felt like lots of adults would know, but certainly any Gen Z or younger probably wouldn't know. But I feel like the week after Christmas can sometimes feel a bit after the Lord Mayor's show. This means... it means an anticlimactic or disappointing end following an otherwise exciting, impressive, or entertaining display. After the good things happened, it's the thing that kind of feels like it happens next, after the Lord Mayor's show. And it comes from the actual Lord Mayor's show, which is a ceremonial parade and pageant which is held every November in the City of London on the day on which the new Lord Mayor of the City of London goes in ceremonial procession, it says, to the Royal Court of Justice to be presented to the Lord Chief Justice and to swear allegiance to the monarch. Does anyone know who the Lord Mayor of the City of London is? Does anyone know who the Lord Chief Justice is? No? Obviously worth doing a big pageant every November then, isn't it? And a big procession through the city. Anyone know what the Lord Mayor is actually meant to do? No, me neither, no. But they wear a big, one of those kind of things they wear all those kind of things. Actually, interesting fact, Kesua knows. Well, almost. The thing I was about to say is what Kesua said, which is, Kesua said, I think it's a woman for the first time, and it's actually a woman for the third time, but this is the first woman who's actually officially changed the name, so it is now the Lady Mayor of London and not the Lord Mayor of London for the next year. Anyway, so there you go. That's a bit of London knowledge for you. But anyway, this phrase comes from, it's a shortening of the phrase which initially was coined, which was, after the Lord Mayor's show comes a dung cart. And that's because this is a photo from 1950s, and you can just about see in this old grainy black and white photo, there's a lot of horses there. So you have this wonderful procession through London, all this kind of pageantry and all this money and all this kind of stuff. And then afterwards, immediately after this goes, they wait a couple of minutes and then they send the dung carts through afterwards. And so this idea is, after the good bit, comes something that's not quite so good, and it's been shortened to this idea of after the Lord Mayor's show. And I feel like sometimes this week can feel a bit like that. We've had this big build up to Christmas. That's the thing that everyone's looking forward to. All this Advent period, we've had Christmas parties, we've had decorations, we've had buying presents for people, all this build up, and then it kind of goes away, doesn't it? And I wonder if the Christmas story can feel a bit like that too. We've had 4 Sundays of Advent. We've had carols by candlelight. We've had our big nativity service. We've had all of these things. We're anticipating the day where Jesus is born. And then we hit December the 26th, and we could be forgiven for thinking, well, what now? What happens next? Keswa read to us from Luke chapter 2, one of the stories about what happens next. Mary and Joseph, like all good Jews, keep the Jewish traditions. They take Jesus to the temple to dedicate him to God and to offer the required sacrifice for Mary's purification. Interesting thing here, you would have noticed if you were listening to Keswa's reading that what they take is 2 pigeons or 2 doves to the temple to be sacrificed. That was because they didn't have any money. What they should have taken is a lamb and a pigeon to the temple to be sacrificed. And it was only those people who didn't have enough money to afford to buy a lamb who would have taken 2 pigeons or 2 doves instead. But anyway, they're at the temple, Mary and Joseph, and they meet 2 people. Firstly, it's Simeon, a bit of the reading that we skipped. And he was an old man who had been told by God that he would not die before he had seen the Messiah, the chosen one, who was going to save the Israelite people. And when Mary and Joseph walk into the temple carrying Jesus, Simeon realizes that this is the moment that he's been waiting for. Lord, as you have promised, it says in the Bible, you may dismiss your servant in peace. I'll die happy, he's saying, because now, today, I've seen the Messiah. And then comes Anna. Anna was a prophet, the story tells us, one of only a few named female prophets in the whole of the Bible. It says she was very old and had been widowed a long time, since only 7 years after getting married. And depending on the translation, she's either 84 years old or she's been widowed for 84 years. And she's spent that time in the temple praying and fasting. She's been waiting, like Simeon, for this moment. But there's something different here. Whereas in verse 26 it says, it had been revealed to him, to Simeon, by the Holy Spirit, that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. It doesn't say anything like this about Anna. She's been praying and fasting in the temple for 80 odd years, but with no kind of spiritual guarantee like Simeon had that she'll see the Messiah. And for me, I think this is one of the overlooked parts of the story. I think this is faith on a different level to Simeon's. Simeon and Anna often get grouped together, but whereas Simeon was waiting for something and he kind of felt like he'd been promised by God and therefore was happy to be there because he knew he was waiting on this promise being fulfilled, Anna doesn't have that. But she still faithfully prays and fasts for 8 decades, waiting, hoping to see this Messiah, but without any sense necessarily of an outcome. I think this shows us Anna's faith. It isn't transactional. It isn't, I will pray to you if you give me that. She trusts God without being able to control the outcome in any way. There's a lot that goes on here in these few verses that Keswa read to us. They tell us again what prophecy is and what prophecy isn't. Anna doesn't predict Jesus' future. Prophecy isn't saying, I see this and you are going to do all of these incredible things into the future. It isn't fortune telling. She recognizes what God is doing now. Anna recognizes that this is the redemption of Israel. It isn't future fortune telling. It's in seeing the movement of God in the moment, in the current moment. It also tells us again that Jesus didn't come to start a new religion. Anna is deeply embedded in temple life, in temple worship. He's been there for 80 odd years. She isn't waiting for Judaism to end. She's waiting for Israel to realize that this is the Messiah and for Israel to be renewed. It tells us again that this is a political story. Verse 38 says, Anna spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem, which is Luke's way of saying, as Luke does so often in the story that he tells about Jesus' life, that there's a contrast here between the way of the Roman Empire, the way of Caesar, and the way of Jesus. And Luke is saying, you've got to choose which one you're going to follow. It can't be both. Because this story, this Jesus story, is set up in opposition to, completely opposite to the way that Caesar and Roman rule works. And it tells us again that the way of Jesus isn't about the powerful. Because Jesus, in all of Luke's stories, doesn't get recognized by the powerful, by the rich, by the rulers, but by the marginalized. Luke tells the story of an unmarried teenage girl who agrees to bear God's son. He tells the story of Zechariah. He tells the story of the shepherds, the most marginalized, the most downtrodden, the least powerful. And now he tells the story of Simeon and Anna, normal people who just followed God. So these verses, they tell us a lot in a short period of time. But as I was preparing for this morning, I wonder what they had to tell us today after the Lord Mayor's show, after Christmas, at the end of a year, and as we start to look forward to the next one. Because the story of Jesus is about God doing something new. It's the birth of a new baby. And in Anna's story, we see this story through the lens of someone who's been faithful her whole long life. The faith, the loyalty, the consistency of someone nearly at the end of their life, inextricably linked to this newborn baby. Jesus' birth is a new story, but it's also the fulfillment of an old story. It's a story which looks back, and it's a story which looks forward. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been very good at looking back at things, at reflecting on things. I'm just not very good at being able to bring myself to stop and look back when I could be spending that time looking forward to what's the next thing that's out there. I'm not very good at stopping and resting in general. Louise, my wife, who lots of you will know, she's got one of those mindfulness apps on her phone. And we were talking about this a while ago, and she was trying to convince me to do this mindfulness app thing on her phone. She said, it'd be good for you to stop and reflect on things. And I said, no, I'm not very good at it. And she said, look, I'm going to put it on the shortest setting that it is. It's 3 minutes. That's all you've got to do. Headphones in, stop for 3 minutes and listen to this thing. That's the shortest setting. And I went, all right, eventually I gave it. Stick my headphones in. She gives me her phone, and I look at her phone, and it says on there, this video is 3 minutes and 7 seconds long. And I kid you not, my immediate first feeling was to feel indignant at this extra 7 seconds that I hadn't signed up for, that I had to be mindful for. I did give it a go, but I did spend lots of the time wondering about those 7 seconds that I'd been cheated out of. So reflecting, it doesn't come naturally to me. It doesn't come easier to me at all. But I have tried to get better at it, because I'm aware that if you don't reflect at least a little bit on what you've done, you don't improve. I've spent lots of the Christmas period watching the cricket, and this is a guy called Monty Panesar, who used to be a spin bowler for England. He was a good player, but he never fulfilled the potential that he had. He never reached the heights that people thought that he would. And there was an interesting interview with another old spin bowler, an Australian guy called Shane Warne, who was at the top of his game, one of the best bowlers there had ever been. And he was interviewed as Monty Panesar was getting on a bit about Monty Panesar's career, and he said, the interviewer said to him, why do you think that he hasn't kicked on? Why hasn't he achieved his potential? He's not a youngster anymore. He's played 33 test matches. And Shane Warne said, the problem is that Monty Panesar hasn't played 33 test matches. He's played the same test match 33 times. His point is obvious, I guess, isn't it? He wasn't learning. Panesar wasn't able to build on the good performances by working out what he had done and doing that more often. And he wasn't able to learn from the bad performances by working out why it didn't work and fixing that for the next time. So 33 test matches in, it was like he was still playing his debut. So how do we get from Monty Panesar to Anna and to theology? Via this book, Models of Contextual Theology by Stephen Bevans. Those of you who know anything about cricket will know that Shane Warne isn't exactly well known as much of a theologian, but his quote about Monty Panesar is a good example of what Bevans calls the praxis model of contextual theology. So what is the praxis model of contextual theology? Well, there are two bits of good news today. And the first is that it's much more simple than it sounds. And the second is that we don't need to look into it in too much depth. We'll save that for another day when we're not quite so full of turkey and chocolate. A quick story to introduce us to contextual theology. When the first British missionaries went to what is then called Zanaki, which we now call Zimbabwe, they used this verse from Revelation 3, verse 20, as the basis for their evangelizing. This is the story they would start to tell about Jesus. And it says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and him with me." British culture dictated, didn't it, then and still does now, that if you go to somebody's house, what do? You knock on the door before you come in. So that is what these British preachers were talking about. It's what they were emphasizing. However, Zanaki doors in those days, Zanaki houses in those days didn't have doors. So to knock, rather than to call out your welcome, marked you out as a thief, because what you were trying to do was gently find out whether there was anybody inside. If you were a friend, you shouted out before you came in. So the Zanaki people, hearing this verse for the first time, their first thought about Jesus was, why are they telling us about a guy who's clearly a thief? That is an example of contextual theology. All contextual theology is a discussion about how much or how little we need to shape our theology to fit the context of the culture around us. We talk about contextual theology all the time here. We just don't call it that. We talk about how, with our 21st century Western eyes, we read the stories of Jesus differently to how those first century Palestinians sat on a hillside in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago would have understood them. Theology in different contexts. So back to Bevans' book. In it, he puts forward 6 models of contextual theology, and he says the way that people do theology is always with some degree of contextualization. We're always putting the gospel into our context in one way or another. And so he puts these 6 models together, and he says that at the one end you've got the countercultural model, which says that experience of the past is much more important than what's going on in the present. And so it's very wary about changing the gospel to fit in with modern times. And at the very far other end, you've got the anthropological model, which says that human experience is the thing that we should value first. And it takes culture very seriously. And one of the others, closer to this anthropological end, is the praxis model. Committed action leads to reflection, which leads to committed and intelligent action. It starts with committed action, then your theory is developed through a period of reflection, analysing the context, and then this leads to a better informed, committed and intelligent action, after which you reflect again, and the spiral continues. Basically, it says you do stuff, you reflect on that stuff, and then you do it better. And it's as simple as that. Is pretty much what Shane Warne thought that Monty Panesar wasn't doing. You do stuff, you stop and reflect on it, and then you do stuff better. But the thing is, when I read Bevans' book for the first time, I came across this praxis model. Reflection suddenly made a lot more sense to me, because it wasn't reflecting for reflecting's sake. It wasn't just sitting in a room thinking about what I had done and whether I'd done the right thing. It was reflecting which led to something, reflecting which made me better, reflecting which made me do things better next time round. It led to action. You do stuff, you reflect on it, and you do stuff better. You learn by doing. And this idea of learning by doing has been an important one throughout the Bible. In the Old Testament, we find these words from the prophet Amos in chapter 5. He says, "Away with the noise of your songs." Sorry, Nate. "I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream." Don't just sing, do something. Or Isaiah, another Old Testament prophet, he says, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." Learn to do right, seek justice. Or another great verse from the New Testament, from a letter written by an early follower of Jesus called James. We're going to be talking about this through January a bit more. This is verse 22 of chapter 1. "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. You should take stock, look back at what you've done, but do it so that you're better informed, better able to do what it says," as James says. Go forward, take action. So as we look forward to 2026, I wonder what that looks like for you. What are the areas in your life where you feel like you need to take that brave next step? Not just stopping at the reflecting part, but to take what you've learned and say, right, now is the time to step out in faith and do something. But how do we do that? Because it's easy to say that, isn't it? It's easy to say that we're going to make changes. We're going to do things differently. 2026 is going to look different to 2025, different to what's come before. But then also it's really easy to leave here and just carry on living how we've always done, isn't it? How do we actually do this? Well, this morning there are two quick things I think we can learn from two very different people. First is Saint David, the patron saint of Wales. His last words to his followers, translated into English, were, "Do the small things. Take care of the little things." When you have the dream, you have the idea, but it all sounds insurmountable. It feels like you could never get there. It feels like it's too much. So you're struggling to work out how you're going to do this massive thing in front of you. Do the small thing. Do the first thing. Just take the first step. We often get people coming here wanting to look around what we do here. This kind of idea of how church and community work kind of fits together is something that loads of people ask loads of questions about. The last time that I read an email from some people who wanted to come and walk around this area with me and find out how we do that church and community thing was about an hour before this service started. A group of people from Sweden who want to come over and spend some time with us here. And one of the things that I always get asked when I do these tours of this area is, but how do I start? How do I get from a church that has some people in it and they like they like a Sunday service and they like a prayer meeting and that kind of thing? How do I go from that to having a primary school, a secondary school, a children's centre, youth work, an open access community space, debt, benefits, housing, immigration advice, all this stuff that we're doing in this area? And I always say, do the small thing. Just start with the easy thing and build from there. Don't try and start by setting up a secondary school, because it's a difficult thing to do. Start with a food bank. Because to start a food bank, all you need is some people to donate some food, some scales to weigh it on, and a laptop maybe to keep a record. You can start with that. What I don't tell them is that then that often merges into something that ends up feeding 30,000 people in the year and takes a heck of a lot of work and consumes the whole of Lily May's December. But you can start with the small step. Because doing a food bank is easier than setting up a death advice centre where you need to get regulated with the Financial Services Authority and all of these kind of things. Take the first step and build from there. And then here's our second person. A runner called John Akwari from Tanzania, who qualified for the Olympics in 1968. The Olympics was in Mexico City, and it was at altitude. And John Akwari had never run at altitude before. So he turns up to run the marathon representing his country for the first time. And he starts, and really early on, he realizes the air's a bit thinner, and it's difficult to run. And he's never experienced anything like it before. But he keeps going, and he keeps going. And after about 12 miles, nearly at the halfway mark, he's jostling for position, and somebody puts their shoulder into him, and he falls, and he lands really awkwardly, and he hurts his shoulder, and then he stands up and he realizes he's dislocated his knee. But he carries on running. The last bit of a marathon at the Olympics is always you run into the stadium and you do a couple of laps of the stadium. By the time that John Akwari entered the stadium, he was not just last, but the winner had finished an hour ago, and the second to last person had also finished. The sun had gone down, and most of the crowd had gone home. But he carried on, and he completed the marathon. And afterwards, he was interviewed by loads of press. Why did you do that? Why did you carry on? You could only finish last. You were miles behind everybody else. Everyone had gone home. No one was even watching you when you finished the race. And John Akwari looked into the camera lens, and he leaned forward into the microphone, and he said, "My country did not send me 5,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish it." His message is a simple one. Keep going. Because whatever you start, if it's hard, there will be times over the next year where that thing that you have started feels too hard. Where it feels like you're only capable of doing the looking back bit, not the looking forward bit, not the moving forward bit. But John Akwari's story doesn't say that we have to be the first to reach the goal, but that we just have to keep on and cross that finishing line. Do the small things and keep going. Anna's story says that we learn from what's come before, and we use that as inspiration to move forward, to do more than we've ever done before. What new thing will you do in 2026? What chances will you take? What part of your life will you reevaluate? There are always a million excuses for why you won't get around to that thing next year. Do it now. Do it anyway. I know that for some of us, Christmas has been the busiest of times, and there's felt like no time to stop and reflect. And I know that some of us will be sitting here having had far too much quiet time and solitude over the last week, and we'll be looking forward to getting back into the usual routine. But however you spent the last week, I'm just going to end by, I'll encourage you to carve out some time over the next couple of days to think about some questions that we're going to end with. I'm going to invite Nath and the band back up. I'm just going to run through 5 questions. I invite you to reflect on them now. Get your phone out and take a photo of them if you'd like to. And then try and carve out some time over the next couple of days to give them some thought. Here's the first one. How have you seen God at work in and through your life in this last year? What are you looking forward to in 2026? Who needs your support, and how will you offer that help? What are you going to do which scares you? And finally, what dream are you nurturing? And what is the first step to realizing that?